So I think one of the most important things when we're thinking about religion in the American Revolution is to remember that before the American Revolution, American Protestants in British North America were part of a shared community with other Protestants across the Atlantic, across the British Atlantic Empire. And so those connections operated on a couple different levels. The first level is political. The leaders of the British Empire thought of themselves as Protestant, as heading what they called the Protestant Interest, which was sort of a foreign policy strategy in order to advance the interests of Protestantism against the enemy, which were the Catholic empires. And so on a political level, the empire was sort of coded as religious. The king was the head of the Church of England, and he was also the protector of the Church of Scotland. So that had a lot of political currency to it, the idea of being Protestant. And so you'd even see people talk about being Protestant in terms of, political slogans. That's the word that they would use in the way that they would reject Catholics. And people in North America were a part of that. They connected the enemies of Protestantism both to the French and the Spanish, and then also to indigenous peoples, because the French and the Spanish had been very effective in missionizing indigenous peoples. And so fighting against potpourri and against tyranny also included fights against indigenous peoples in North America. So that's the political level. Then there's the religious level. So the major denominations across the British Atlantic Empire, and that would be the Church of England, which was the largest, the Presbyterian Church, which was established in Scotland and also had a substantial number of adherents in North America, and then also Congregationalists, which are sort of the post-Puritan communities. So that's largely New England. Those three sort of large communities had footprints on both sides of the Atlantic. Their connections weren't so much through their denominations, but through whom they built connections to for kind of shared projects. So missionary projects, efforts to bring devotional literature to people across the colonies. Most of the time, the center is in Great Britain, and these societies would have then corresponding members or actual just correspondence in North America, and they would write back and forth and send resources. People in the colonies would say, we need more missionaries, or we need more clergy for this kind of area. And then people in Britain would raise that money, would do the printing, and would send those tracts or support missionary work in the colonies. Scaffolding is a great metaphor to think about the way this religious system worked in the 18th century, because it helps us think of a structure that surrounds the empire and depends on it. So there were three different networks of Protestants who communicated across the Atlantic. You had people within the Church of England, and that's the largest network. It's also the largest established church. And then you have a group called dissenters. That's kind of a problematic word for religious historians. And the reason is that what it sort of literally means is people who are outside of the established church. But starting with that idea, the people who are outside of the established church in England, which would be specifically it's Congregationalists, Baptists, and Presbyterians, those groups band together and they call themselves sort of capital D dissenters. So it's a specific group. And they develop common feeling with North American dissenters, although in North America, many of those dissenters are actually in the established church. So in New England, people who are called dissenters are actually a part of the established church. And then the third group, and I think the group that in some ways is the most interesting, are the people who I call them awakened Protestants. They're the antecedents of people that today we tend to call evangelicals, but there are a lot of breaks in that history, so we don't want to draw too neat of a line between them. And awakened Protestant is a term that's more closely associated with that time period, with the 18th century. And those are the people who came to a spiritual awakening during the period of what we call the Great Awakening, so followers of George Whitefield, John Wesley, and then there are a variety of other figures. And they move around that entire Atlantic system, and they're actually in all the different denominations, and so they bridge it. So to come back to the scaffolding metaphor, what's really important about the scaffolding is that people like awakened Protestants can sort of run all around different parts of it. They can communicate with people in different denominations. They can be a part of the established church in one place and communicate easily with people who are not a part of the established church in another place, and they're able to build really robust connections.